Hey again and welcome back to a new video. This video will be the next part out of my champion series, so where I try to present the champions as detailed as possible, so a very detailed champion guide. And the next champion I want to present to you is Inara, the Stone Warden, so one of our point tanks. And those type of videos or those type of guides are supposed to be for players who either are new to the game, want to learn a certain champion, or also experienced players who are just interested in champion guides. Before I start the champion guide, I want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Intro and I've played the game for more than 4,500 hours and have more than 100 hours on Inara. I'm a tank and support main, so I think I have a good understanding of the game overall. I have good mechanical skills and a good game sense, so I think this all can help me to present Inara, the Stone Warden, to you as a good point tank. For the ones who are only interested in a certain part of the guide, there will be timestamps, so you can just look in the description, skip to whatever part you want to watch, and there will also be a link to my script, to a Google Docs document, so for everyone who is interested in the script or who just want to see everything visualized, just look in the description. Alright, let's quickly go over some terms and abbreviations I might use in the script or the video so everyone knows what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about CC, I basically mean crowd control, so any kind of stun where you're forced to stay in place and can't shoot, cripple where you can't use your movement ability, silence where you can't use any abilities, not even ultimate abilities, polymorph where you just get transformed into a chicken or a cookie by a certain ultimate ability, exile or banish where you can't get interacted with, so you can't get damaged but your supports can't heal you, root where you're forced to stay in place but still can shoot, slow where your movement speed is just slowed down, or knockback or knock up. Comp means team composition, so what champions do you have on your team or the enemy team has on their side. Most point catchers have multiple fights about the point, so that means once you force the enemy team to either fall back or you kill the enemy team, you want to start doing something called zoning. That basically means you want to push up and dismount all their respawns, and you also want to make sure that the enemy team can't retouch the point, so it's easier for your team to secure the point capture. One term I might be using later on in the guide will be LOS or line of sight. That basically means to have a straight view on your ally or on your enemy. So for example, on some supports you actually need LOS to be able to heal your teammates, but you also need LOS obviously to damage the enemy because you can't damage them through walls. Caught or cauterize is a passive effect we have in the game which helps you to reduce the amount of healing your enemy receives once you shot them with your auto attacks for 1.5 seconds. And lastly, some abbreviations I use. DR means damage reduction, CD means cooldown, and CDR means cooldown reduction. Alright, let's finally get into the champion guide. With Inara I chose a champion which gets played on PC and on console. You don't need a good aim for her, you can have a big impact with just doing pointing things, so focusing on your mechanical skills and game sense will definitely help you to get better with Inara. High mechanical skills and game sense separate a decent Inara from Inara with a carry potential. Inara is a frontline champion which gets mainly played as a point tank, but she offers enough damage and survivability to be an off tank in certain comps as well. Point tanks should sit on point, contest, eat damage for their backline and protect their supports until the fight over the objective is won or the enemy point tank is killed, so you can start zoning and pushing up. As most point tanks, Inara is about cooldown usage, but she's the very definition of circling your CDs in a proper way. With the right legendary, Inara gains CC immunity. She has high survivability, with her ult she offers CC to enable her team, and has basically free DR and rejuvenate in her race kit. Skilled Inara players can also protect their teammates with right ward placements. Inara is more or less an easy champion, but she requires a lot of mechanical skill, so the more you learn how to circle her CDs efficiently, the better you'll get. She's able to eat tons of damage and is literally a damage sponge, but she requires a lot of heal. So good Inara players need to have good game sense to know when to get off point and fall back, since she relies heavily on her support. A down point for her is definitely that compared to other point tanks, Inara's base kit is lacking on mobility and self-sustain. After giving you the quick overview of her champion kit, so what she offers to her team and what her strengths and weaknesses are, I finally want to talk a little bit more detailed about her champion kit. Inara's base HP is 4700 and she can increase it up to 5450 with her loadout cards. Inara's auto attack is called Stone Spear. She fires out a burst of 3 projectiles, each dealing 225 damage, so 675 damage in total. Each burst of projectile does count as 1 ammo. Inara has an ammo count of 5 and she's slowed by 30% while firing, so you don't want to shoot while needing to touch or wanting to escape. Her secondary fire is called Earthenguard, and this offers 30% damage reduction to Inara and her deployables. It also increases the healing she receives by 40%. This effect stacks up with Rejuvenate. With a certain card, she's also CC immune while using this ability. Keep in mind you can't cancel this ability early to get the earlier cooldown reduction. Decreased damage by this ability does count as shielding, but keep in mind you're not affected by Wrecker. Your movement ability is called Water's Field, and instead of giving you some kind of movement, it offers you utility. So it slows down enemies by 60% and deals 150 damage. This ability can also be reactivated to put it down, so to start the cooldown earlier. It is also affected by Bulldozer and the Obelisk has 1500 HP. Impest deploys a wall with 5000 HP, which can be used to block any incoming damage or block the enemy. Your wall can destroy it by reactivating the ability to start an earlier cooldown. Damage blocked by your wall does count as shielding, but it's affected by Bulldozer, not Wrecker. You can also knock up enemies slightly when placing the wall underneath them to maybe knock them off the map. You're also able to wall yourself or your teammates on top of it to help either of you to reach certain positions. Inara's ultimate ability is called Seismic Crash. It stuns enemies for 2 seconds and deals 500 damage on impact. During her ult, Inara is CC immune and is not affected by gravity. You can stun it through shields, and if you throw your spear in front of Atlas wall, this stun will also go through it. Alright, let's talk about Inara's Legendaries. In this part I will talk about the Legendaries itself and talk about when you want to play the Legendary or maybe want to think about a different Legendary. I will also give some tips what you want to pay attention to when playing a certain Legendary. All of Inara's Legendaries help her to improve one of her abilities, so she gains a slight buff to one of her abilities. Her default Legendary is called Mother's Grace, and this ability gives a buff to her Earthenguard. You gain 10% extra damage reduction and CC immunity while using Earthenguard. In my opinion, it's the best pointing Legendary, or at least the easiest to make work for her. It makes her even more tanky and gets rid of the vulnerability due to getting CC'd as a point tank. Most point tanks also suffer a lot from CC when trying to touch the point, since resilience only reduces the amount of CC, but it won't get rid of the whole effect itself, so you still get stunned or knocked away when trying to touch, but when playing this Legendary you're CC immune, so those effects won't do anything to you, so you have it really easy to make sure you can touch the point in time. You usually end up playing this Legendary since there's a lot of CC in the game currently, so most team comps have at least some kind of heavy CC which tries to CC you when not playing this Legendary, so you'd rather play this Legendary over another Legendary, not because it's better, but just because you want to get that CC immunity. In my opinion, it's the safest Legendary or the easiest Legendary to get into Inara, since you don't have to think about CC here or no CC, because even though there won't be any CC, you still have the extra damage reduction, which helps you to be even more tanky and helps you to just get into Inara as a champion. But does that mean you never want to pick a different Legendary on Inara when there's CC on the enemy team? No, definitely not. It just make things easier for you, or I'd say you won't do anything wrong with picking this Legendary, since you also gain extra damage reduction. So once you understand what kind of CC you want to counter or how to counter heavy CC, you can think of picking a different Legendary, since the other Legendaries will also have a big impact on your playstyle. So once you learned how to play Inara, how to circle your cooldowns efficiently, you surely can think of picking another Legendary. It is just the easiest one to learn in Inara, I would say. So talking about ways to counter heavy CC is definitely resilience, but there are some abilities you can't even counter with resilience, since full resilience only reduces the effect or the efficiency of some CC abilities. but there are other CC abilities you can't counter at all with Resilience, like Khan ult or Makoa hook. You still can get Khan ulted or Makoa hooked, so displaced or get out of position, get pulled out of your team, getting put into an uncomfortable position. So even with maximum resilience, they can use those abilities on you. That's why it is such a strong ability or such a strong legendary to get that CC immunity, to not be able to get Khan ulted, Makoa hooked. So you just want to make sure they have no chance to actually CC you. So how do you want to play Mother's Grace? How do we want to get as much value out of your Earthen Guard, having extra damage reduction and CC immunity? I think I said it already, but the strongest part about this legendary is CC immunity, since usually you're really vulnerable to it and you definitely want to try to counter other CC abilities. The first thing you want to do actually starts before the match started. You want to pay attention to the enemy team comp to get understanding what kind of abilities do they have, what kind of CC do they have, to know when you want to use your Earthen Guard so you can get the most value out of your CC immunity, because you definitely want to counter such CC abilities. There are two different types of CC I want to talk about now. You have indicator based and non-indicator based CC. So indicator based means you have an indicator which shows up before the ability is about to hit you. Such abilities are BK Grumpy Bomb, Ceres ult. So you see the ability starts, you know you have 1 to 2 seconds until the ability hits you. You want to learn those timings to activate your Earthen Guard in time. But even if you're not good at learning those timings, you can activate the ability once the indicator started. That's why I said Game Sense is such an important skill to have on Inara, or which makes the difference between a decent Inara and an insanely good Inara, because you're actually able to counter such abilities. Other Inara players just get full resilience, but they still get chickened and the enemy team still has an opportunity to kill you, or you still get hooked and you can't counter the hook by resilience, as I said. So having game sense, having good game sense, learning the timings when abilities are off cooldown, when the core hook is off cooldown again, so when 10 to 12 seconds pass, or learning when Pip is about to go in, when Xin is about to go in to ult you, is game sense. That's called game sense. That's why I said it is so important, because you're actually able to counter those abilities with your game sense, activating your Mother's Grace in time. Well, I mean, yeah, thanks intro. You explained the difference between indicator based and non-indicator based CC, but how does that help me? Well, yeah, I did, but that's why I said game sense is so important, because if you have good game sense, you know when those abilities are about to hit you, when those non-indicator based abilities are about to hit you. Everyone is able to dodge indicator based abilities when just activating the Earthen Guard in time, but actually knowing when the core is about to hook you, or knowing when the Pip is about to ult you and activating your Earthen Guard in time makes the difference between a decent Inara and a very good Inara. Because, as I said earlier on, even though you have resilience, you still get chickened, you still get hooked, and you can't counter it. I mean, sure, the time of your chicken is decreased, but you have a minimum time on Pip ult, so people are still able to focus you down, or can shoot you at once and still kill you in time, because you still have 1500 HP for 2 seconds, and Makoa is still able to hook you. So that's why I said game sense is such an important skill on Inara to make the difference between a decent Inara and a very good Inara. Your level 2 unlock is called Tremors, and Tremors grants you 2 charges on your impasse, so on your wall, and it also decreases the cooldown to 12 seconds, but you can't destroy your walls anymore. The cooldowns of your wall won't run simultaneously, so you have to wait 24 seconds to get back both charges of your wall. Your wall is a really impactful ability, because besides blocking damage, you also can trap enemies in doorways to confirm the kill on them. You also can try to save your teammates while blocking off the enemy, but keep in mind that when playing Tremors, you can't destroy the wall, so once you mistakenly trap your teammate, they will die. So I'd say use this legendary only, or try to save your teammates when you already know how to play Inara and place your walls, since you can't destroy them and your teammates will die if you mistakenly wall them off. I also like to play this legendary when I have to play point tank on a very open map, so I can easily hide behind my own wall. I have 2 charges, I have more options to use the wall, I have more options to hide behind and get some kind of shield, since Inara is also lacking some shielding she can hide behind, but when having your wall you can place your wall on the point and hide behind it. This legendary gets even more impactful when using certain loadout cards around your wall, since you now have 2 charges. That means you can use your walls more often, so you get more impact out of your loadout cards. I will talk about loadout cards later on in detail, but one card I want to talk about now is Summit. Since Summit helps you to turn Inara in some kind of off-tank, you get rid of the lacking mobility she usually suffers from. So when placing the wall underneath you, you get some kind of knock-up. So now you're able to get on high ground positions and help your flank and support them, because whoever reigns high ground wins the point fight, wins the defense or push. So this makes it really easy for Inara to get on those high ground positions and get rid of the lacking mobility, as I said. Most people consider this legendary a troll, but in my opinion it is a very good legendary in the right hands. If you know how to use your walls efficiently, how to help your team efficiently, how to use some loader cards efficiently with your walls, you can be really impactful and really annoying for the enemy team. Even though I said you can turn Inara in some kind of off-tank, she's not the typical off-tank. She's mostly lacking those typical off-tank mechanics or characteristics. She doesn't have enough self-sustain, so she really relies on heals of their support, and she's also lacking some kind of utility. She can offer a flank or also some other kind of support like shields. She can offer a flank. As I said earlier on, you usually would play this legendary when there's no CC at all or almost no CC on the enemy team, since Inara is really vulnerable to CC, and even when getting full resilience, as I said, you can't counter abilities such as Xin ult or Jago ult. But why do I think this legendary is so strong and no troll at all, why you're actually able to carry with it legendary, and why the wall is actually so good on Inara? I mean, first of all, you obviously can prevent the enemy team from touching the point. You either can ward them off when you're about to actually capture, so the last percentages, but on some maps, in early game at least, it's also able to get a high capture progress when you consistently rotate your CDs and ward the enemy team off, make sure the point tank can't get in the point fight, so to say, so ward them off so you get a high capture progress. Okay, just imagine the enemy team has a Khan and Khan ulted your support and Khan is about to throw your support off the edge. Then you can use your wall and put the wall between the edge and Khan so he can't, he can't throw them off the edge. Or imagine there's a Makor on the enemy team, and remember, as I said, game sense is really important. So knowing when Makor is about to either hook you or your teammates, you can put the wall between Makor and you or your teammates, so he either misses the hook because the wall was put up before, or you also are able to put the wall up at the timing he hits the hook, and the hook will break when there's a wall between him and the enemy or the player he hooked. Once an enemy has pushed past the choke point, you can ward that choke point. So the enemy team can't follow up, so the enemy is alone and your team can focus them down to get a free pick. And you obviously can always do this in little rooms or doorways by yourself. So trap the enemy and kill them, because Inara actually does a respectable amount of damage. So as you can see, you have many options on how to use your wall, or also have a little bit advantage when having good game sense. So that's why I think having double wall or having decreased cooldown on the wall is actually pretty nuts in the right hands of a good Inara player. Another really good way for your team and really annoying way for the enemy team to use your wall efficiently is block line of sight to the enemy support. So as I said early on, there are a lot of supports who need actually LOS to heal their teammates. So once you block the line of sight to the point tank, they can't heal the point tank, and the point tank will die easily, or it is way easier for you to actually secure the kill on the enemy point tank without getting healed. Alright, let's talk about her last legendary, Treacherous Ground. When playing Treacherous Ground, the radius of your water's field is increased by 50% and you also cripple enemies. I personally would say you pick Treacherous Ground to counter the enemy team instead of starting the draft with the idea of I'm gonna pick Treacherous Ground. It's more like you go through the draft and recognize, well, they have a lot of champions relying on their movement ability. I could play Treacherous Ground. Or the other way around, your team is built up and you recognize, well, we don't really have CC to sub their movement ability, so I could play Treacherous Ground to counter them in some way. Alright, let's talk about some champs, especially about some tanks you can counter with Treacherous Ground and why you try to counter them or why they get countered by Treacherous Ground. The easiest champion to counter, or the champion counter most with picking Treacherous Ground, is Barrick, since you either have Barrick or Inara on your team. Those are the point tanks to go to. Barrick relies heavily on his dash because he uses either bowling ball or double time due to the fact that he has a low HP pool compared to other point tanks, so he needs the extra heal or shield given by his dash. There are also other champions or other tanks you could try to counter with Treacherous Ground, but it is actually more unlikely to get value out of Treacherous Ground because those are mostly off tanks, so they are not really playing close to you if they play correctly, since off tanks don't really play around point or play on point. Let's just say they play somewhere around point, so they are not close enough to actually counter them with Treacherous Ground. Those tanks can be Atlas, since Atlas also has a low HP pool compared to other tanks due to the fact that he basically gains a second life with his second chance, so he can kind of reset his HP pool, but if he's crippled he can't use his ability anymore and can't get any value out of his second chance. You also could consider picking Treacherous Ground against Rom or Ashe when using their DR legendary, or even if they don't use DR legendary, but they usually rely heavily on their dash when they actually use the DR on movement ability. But I personally would say, as I said earlier on, it's really unlikely to get value out of this against off tanks, so it's usually not really worth it picking it against it. I mean, you could play Treacherous Ground Inara as an off tank, but you could just play any kind of cripple on DPS or supports, but I also explained earlier on that sometimes those supports or DPS are banned or already picked, or you just forgot about it. Then it could be an idea to pick cripple Inara to counter them in some way and don't give them a free game. It obviously also counters every other movement ability since it's a cripple, so it prevents people from using their movement ability, but there are some champions where you get more value than against other champions. Those champions can be Alacrity Lian, since she heavily relies on her movement ability, or she plays around her movement ability. Exaction Cassie, it's basically the same. They need to use their dodge roll to get the extra damage, or they usually go in, go out, go in, go out with their dodge roll reset. And it's very good against Bounce House Bugs, since even though he's trying to jump on you and tries to get the extra damage, if you cripple him mid-air or if you cripple him with your Warder's Field, he won't get any extra damage, he won't get any knock-up, so he won't get any value out of Bounce House. You also counter more supports champions, since most supports rely on their movement ability to get out of crucial situations, but I personally would say it is very unlikely to get value out of this when playing point tank and playing Treacherous Ground Inara, since the better the enemy support is, the better is their positioning, and usually you won't be able to actually cripple them without giving up your own safe positioning, so it is definitely not worth it to try to chase down the enemy support to actually cripple them and maybe get the kill. As explained early on, you definitely want to pay attention to the enemy team comp before the match starts, because you definitely want to know what you're playing against. You want to know whether you need to buy resilience or not. You want to know if you need to play carefully because they have a Makor, so you easily can get hooked. That's why you definitely want to look at the enemy team comp to be prepared for every possible situation or every possible ability affecting you. Besides the more common way to play this legendary as a point tank and try to counter the enemy point tanks or counter Barrick in most cases, you also could decide to play this legendary as an off tank. Remember when I talked about Tremors and said you can turn Inara into some kind of off tank, that she's still lacking those typical off tank abilities or off tank characteristics. But when playing Treacherous Ground, you gain something like that because you gain a cripple in your base kit. So you have now a way to support your flank in a more easier way because you can cripple the enemy support or the enemy flank off tank duo. So it's easier for you and your flank to get those kills to finish up to pressure their backline. Okay, let me explain the different playstyles of off-tank or point-tank Treacherous Ground Inara. When playing point-tank, you definitely want to play on point, you want to do point-tank stuff, you just want to pressure the enemy point-tank, and you need to get a feeling when, for example, let's just take Barrick. Barrick is getting low, he probably will use his dash because he needs that extra sustain, or he needs that extra shielding on bowling wall. So that's why you only want to use the cripple when he's about to get low, or when he's about to get hit by another ultimate ability by your team or something like that, so he can't get out or he can't activate that healing or shielding over time. So that's why you also need game sense for playing this legendary, because you need to time it correctly, you need to get the feeling for when to activate those abilities or those cripplings. So when playing off-tank Inara with Treacherous Ground, you kind of want to do the same thing, but it is way easier to counter the enemy off-tank, because when playing against Ashe or Rom, you definitely see when they are about to start their movement ability, so you can just interrupt the ability and force them to stay in place. Another thing you would definitely want to do is trying to go for their supports, because off-tanks also should go for the supports or for the backline, and supports usually play in the backline, that's why you want to go for supports. So the idea is to go in, cripple the support, and either kill the support on yourself, or have your flank with you in the idea where you definitely have the flank with you to kill the enemy support together. But that means that you're playing really aggressive, and this is usually not the typical off-tank play, because off-tanks should make space, they should pressure the backline, but they are not supposed to actually be in the enemy backline, because you're way out of your own positioning, and that's why it is only on Inara the play to go in for their support and try to actually get close to the support to cripple the support. Even though Inara gains some kind of utility with playing this legendary, it is still very rough for her to be an actual off-tank, because she's still lacking those typical off-tank characteristics. Let me just compare to other off-tanks. Other off-tanks have more self-sustain. As I said, Inara does have some kind of self-sustain with certain cards, but it is definitely not high enough or not as high as other off-tanks have. Then other off-tanks also have some high damage or pressure potential over range, and if they don't have that high damage over range, they have good movement abilities to close up that distance to be close enough to actually pressure the enemy backline. But Inara is also heavily lacking on movement abilities or that mobility to close up that distance, and she's also lacking on damage over range. That's why it is very rough for her to be an actual good off-tank without overextending, because she can eat a lot of damage and she has to be close to deal damage, but that is kinda risky because she has to overextend, be out of line of sight of her support or way too far away to actually get healed, and it is very risky to play Inara as an off-tank. After I presented the legendaries Inara has and gave some advice what you want to pay attention to when picking those legendaries, I want to talk about her loadouts. So I will present my loadouts I use on all legendaries for Inara, and I will also explain why do I choose certain loadout cards, what do I expect with picking those loadout cards. But before I actually start, it is very important for me to say that it's my personal loadout, or those are my personal loadouts fitting to my playstyle. So I don't want to say that those are the loadouts to go to or that everyone should pick those loadouts. If you found your loadout fitting or working for you, then it is perfect. You shouldn't change it, because I just want to help newer players get an understanding of what loadout cards might work and explain why they do work for me. So just give them an idea what they could choose, not saying that they should use it. Alright, I will quickly go over the loadout cards, saying what each card does, and then after it I will explain why I use those cards. So let's talk about Mother's Grace loadout. I use Steadfast on level 5, so increase my HP as much as possible. I use Geomance on level 5, so reduce the cooldown of my Earthen Guard as much as possible. Stone Bulwark on level 3, so some kind of heal on my Earthen Guard. Sacred Ground on level 1. So the ROI being in Water's Field, and Standing Stones on level 1, it's reduced cooldown of my Water's Field. So what's the idea behind this loadout? When playing Mother's Grace, I definitely play it as a point tank, and point tanks are supposed to be as tanky as possible. They are supposed to be on point, at least for some time, eat damage, contest the objective against the enemy point tank, and they are supposed to die second last after support. So supports are supposed to have the least death, and then point tanks. So to get even more tankiness, besides the fact that Inara is already tanky enough or a damage sponge herself given by her general loadout or by her general kit, I want to increase that tankiness even more. That's why I decided to put Steadfast on level 5 to have the maximum HP possible. Why do I use Geomance on level 5? Why do I think it is so important to reduce the cooldown of my Earthen Guard as much as possible? Regardless of the legendary, I think Earthen Guard is Inara's strongest ability, because it grants her free damage reduction and free rejuvenate, so free increased heals. But especially because I play Mother's Grace, so I have even more damage reduction and I'm also CC immune while using this ability. I want to reduce the cooldown of it as much as possible. So besides the high HP pool I have already, I want to have free damage reduction. That means I want to reduce the cooldown I have between my damage reduction. So I want to reduce the amount of time I'm vulnerable to not having damage reduction and to not having CC immunity. That's what I gain when picking this legendary. And I also want to have as many options to increase my heal. That's why I think it is so important, or it is so strong, to have that extra 40% increased heal when having my Earthen Guard up. Because that means when you usually would get healed for 1000 HP by a pip potion, you now get healed by 1400 HP when using your RMB and being not affected by Cauterize. Stone Bulwark on level 3 just helps me to have at least some kind of self-sustain, because I usually would use my Earthen Guard when being low HP anyway, so even if my support is maybe not looking at me or is waiting for his cooldown to get off cooldown, I can activate, or I will activate, my right click to already have some kind of self-sustain, so I be a little bit more independent from my support. I have it a little bit easier to keep myself healed, and I make it also easy for my support to not have to waste or not have to spend so many resources on keeping me full HP or keeping me healed at least. As filler cards, I decided to choose some Water's Field cards, because my Water's Field is still a very strong ability I want to use regularly, because it grants me some kind of utility. So I'm able to slow down the enemy pointing, which makes it easier for me to focus them and deal damage to them. So that's why I decided to choose some kind of damage reduction, because damage reduction is really good, especially on Inara. It makes you even more tanky. It is very annoying for the enemy team to kill you when having another resource of DR besides your Earthen Guard. And as the last card, I just wanted to reduce the cooldown because it is utility, so I want to reduce the cooldown of utility. And it, as I said earlier on, I choose Sacred Ground, so DR, I want to decrease the cooldown on my DR. Let's talk about my Tremors loadouts. For Tremors I have two different loadouts depending on the map, so depending on the fact if there is a high ground I want to get on or not. Let's start with the Tremors loadout I use when I want to get on high ground. I use Plateau on level 5, so shield on activating my wall. I use Summit on level 5, so giving myself a knock up when I place the wall underneath me. Geomancer on level 1, so reduce cooldown on my Earthen Guard. Steadfast on level 1, so increase HP, and Rolling Stones on level 3, so CDR, that means cooldown reduction after getting in a limb. Okay, Plateau is one of the favorite cards I have on Inara, because the extra shielding is actually pretty good. I know many people underestimate this card, but the highest shielding I could get in a game was more than 200k shielding, even though my wall still counts as shielding, but still, this amount of shielding is very good, and the fact that I get a shield when activating my wall helped me in so many situations where I was about to die. So how did that card help me to survive so many crucial situations? So remember when I said, well, when getting low I just activated my wall. That means I didn't try to put the wall in front of me to block some damage, I just activated the wall, because in that situation it doesn't matter, you still get the full amount of shielding, because shielding can't get countered when activating the shield. When, let's just take another card, let's just take the heal card on activating a wall. This card gets countered by Cauterize. When you're affected by Cauterize, activate your wall, you won't get the full amount of healing. So that's why I think the shield card is better. I mean, yes, there is Wrecker in the game, people maybe have Wrecker because of your off tank, but still, when activating this card, you get the full amount of shielding. That's why I think it's such a strong ability to make it easier for you to live crucial situations. So you're able to get out a little bit more time for your support to heal you, to hit that heal, to activate the heal, to get off cooldown, etc. I think you get the point, and also the fact that you have so many walls up makes it so easy for you to consistently get some kind of damage reduction or some kind of shielding, which makes it even more easier for you to survive, because you're more tanky, you get another resource, another pool of HP. As I said, I use this loadout when I want to get on high ground, so when I'm playing high ground maps. So how does Summit on level 5 help me reaching high ground? So whenever I place the wall underneath me, I get a knock up, which helps me to get on high ground. Usually you're not really able as Inara to get on high ground, but when playing Summit and placing the wall underneath you, the knock up helps you, makes it very easy for you to get on high ground. I'm a fan of using my walls as much as possible because I decided to play Tremors. That means I have a double wall, so that's why I want to try to get as much value out of my walls. That's why I try to use the walls to block out as many enemies or damage as possible. I want to try to save my teammates, I want to try to trap enemies, and I also love to use the value of Summit even when I don't want to get on high ground, because I just can place the wall underneath me to knock me in the air when I want to avoid abilities on the ground or when I just want to get in a line of sight to my support. That's why I love to use Rolling Stones in level 3, because I just get cooldown reduction after limbs. When I play Tremors, I usually get a lot of the limbs, so that's why I get a lot of cooldown reduction. That's why I get a lot of more walls. I can use the walls, I can use the shielding granted by my walls. So as you can see, I really thought about my loadouts. I really thought about how can I combine those loadout cards to get as much value out of it. How can I combine it with my playstyle? As filler cards, I just decided to go the normal cards I would use on a higher level, so that's why I decided to use Geomancer on level 1 and Steadfast on level 1. So just use the Earthen Guard as much as possible, reduce the cooldown as much as possible, at least as a filler card, and also increase my HP even more. You also could decide to put Plateau in a lower level and Steadfast on a higher level, but I don't know, I just love to play around my shielding. I just love to, I don't know, troll some enemies because they don't expect the shielding on activating your wall, if you would understand what I mean. Okay, before I start talking about the Tremors loadout I use when there's no high ground on the map, so when it's just a flat map or something like that, I still want to say that I love to play the high ground loadout, because even though you can't reach the high ground because there's no high ground on the map or something like that, I still love to use the extra knockup I received by Summit, because it's still a very good card and you still can play really good around the knockup and use the knockup for yourself. So that's why I still use that loadout mainly for Tremors, even though there is no high ground on the map. Okay, let's start talking about the Tremors loadout I use when I don't want to get extra knockup. So I still use Plateau on level 5, so the shield when activating my wall. I use Steadfast on level 5, so increased HP on maximum. I use Rolling Stones on level 3, so cooldown reduction on receiving a limbs. Geomancer level 1, that means reduce cooldown on my Earthen Guard, and Stone Bulwark on level 1, so still some heal on my Earthen Guard. Okay, what's the idea behind this loadout? This idea is basically to be as tanky as possible. That's why I decided to increase my HP as much as possible, because I already want to be as tanky as possible. Remember I said you can turn Inara in some kind of off tank, but I prefer to play her as a point tank. So that's why point tanks want to be as tanky as possible. I want to increase my HP as much as possible. And I also want to use the other resource of HP I have besides healing I could give myself. I want to give myself a shield, because as explained earlier on, shielding is not affected by Wrecker when activating the shield. So you straight up get extra HP when activating your wall, because you play Plateau on level 5. You get a huge shield, so it is very easy for you to be even more tanky. And because I still want to play around my walls and not just immediately put them up when I have them or whatever, I want to use them to block enemies, block damage, trap enemies, etc. I want to get Rolling Stones on level 3 because I want to get the cooldown reduction on the limbs, because I want to reduce the cooldown, and I wanted to make it possible for myself to give me more options to use my shields given by Plateau and use the walls, because the cooldown is reduced when playing it on Rolling Stones level 3. So for the last two cards I just decided to go some filler cards, so that's why I decided to have some heal on my R&B, so on my Earthen Guard, to be a little bit more tanky, to have some kind of self-sustain, even though it is affected by Cauterize and it is not that great. It's still some other resource of extra HP, if you understand what I mean, because heal is some resource of extra HP, it is just extra HP over time. And I decided to reduce the cooldown on my Earthen Guard with Geomancer on level 1, because it is a very strong ability, and the reason why I sacrifice Geomancer or the points out of Geomancer and put them into Rolling Stones is because Rolling Stones affects all my CDs. That means I reduce the cooldown on my wall, I reduce the cooldown on my Waters Field, and I reduce the cooldown on my Earthen Guard. So the idea of this playstyle is play around limbs, play around cooldown reduction. That's why I decided to put Geomancer down and Rolling Stones up, because I want to play around cooldown reduction of all my cooldowns, because as I said earlier on, I want to play around my walls, but when playing around my walls, I want to get the cooldown reduction. That means I also get the cooldown reduction on my Earthen Guard. That's why I don't need Geomancer on a higher level than level 1 or just a filler card, because I have the cooldown reduction of all my CDs on Rolling Stones. Okay, let's talk about Treacherous Ground. What loadout do I use for Treacherous Ground? I use Standing Stones on level 5, so reduce the cooldown on my Water Speed. Steadfast on level 5, that means maximum HP, as always. Sacred Ground level 3, so damage reduction while being in my Water Speed. Geomancer level 1, so reduce cooldown on my Earthen Guard. And Stone Bulwark, just a little bit of self-sustain given by the heal on my Earthen Guard. So, what's the idea? As explained earlier on, when playing Treacherous Ground, you mostly try to get in or get close to the enemy. That's why you want to have the HP increase as much as possible, because you have to be tanky when deciding to go in, because otherwise it's not worth it. The enemy has it pretty easy to kill you, because you want to go in or you're getting close. That means it is very easy to deal damage to you. That's why I decided to use Steadfast on level 5. The reduced cooldown on my Water Speed just helps me to get as much value out of my utility given by the Legendary. So get as much value out of the cripple. I want to cripple as many people, as many enemies as possible. That's why I want to reduce the cooldown as much as possible. The reason why I decided to use DR instead of reduce cooldown on my Earthen Guard is because for the same reason I increased my HP. I decide to go in when playing Treacherous Ground because I want to get the cripple, obviously. So that's why I need to be close to the enemy, and that's why I decided to use DR on my Water Speed, because every time I activate my Water Speed, I will be in my Water Speed. That means I have DR when being in my Water Speed. I just have to use one ability to get DR. So if not playing Sacred Ground, you would need to use your Earthen Guard to get the extra HP or the DR to be more tanky. But then you have to sacrifice 2 abilities at once. When using damage reduction on your Water Speed, you just activate your Water Speed to get the cripple out, maybe kill the enemy or at least annoy them, and have DR on activating your Water Speed the whole time you're being in your Water Speed. So that's why you still have your Earthen Guard up in case you would need to use it to get more DR or to just get more heal. So as you can see, that's the idea or the reason why I use Sacred Ground on a higher level than Geomancer, because even if I said Earthen Guard is my strongest ability, I want to be tanky when I have to, and I have to be tanky when being close to my enemy, and I will be close to my enemy when I use my Water Speed. That's why I decided to give myself DR on my Water Speed instead of reducing the cooldown on my Earthen Guard. And lastly, some filler cards, as always. Geomancer level 1, because I still want to reduce the cooldown on my Earthen Guard. It's still a very strong ability, or the strongest, even though I play more around my Water Speed with this playstyle, and some kind of self-sustain, so some kind of heal on my Earthen Guard. That's why Stone Bulwark on level 1. Lastly, I just want to talk about 2 other cards. So the one card is the heal on activating my wall. I just think that the shield is better than the heal, because the heal will be affected by Cauterize. So just take the situation, the enemy is shooting at you, they are applying Cauterize, and you will activate your wall. You won't get healed for as much as possible, or as much as you would receive, because you are affected by Cauterize. If the enemy is shooting you and you have shield on your wall, you still will get the extra shield or the shield or the HP given by your shield, because even though they have Wrecker, you still get the shield up front. It is not immediately affected by that Wrecker. That's why I think Plateau is better card than Craig. And the other card I want to talk about is extra HP on your wall. In my opinion, it is not needed, because you just don't need it for most cases you use your wall for. So you want to knock yourself on high ground, you don't need extra HP on your wall. You want to block enemies to touch point or prevent them from touching point, you don't need extra HP on the wall. You want to block heavy incoming damage abilities like Sky Ult, Term Ult, block those ultimate abilities, you don't need extra HP on it. So as you can see, in my opinion, it's just not needed. It would be a little bit of wasted points, so you could decide to use it as filler card or whatever, but I think on a higher level it is not very needed. Alright, let's talk about the next topic. Let's talk about maps. Are there good maps? Are there bad maps for Inara? There are definitely good maps for Inara. I think Inara has no maps where she really sucks on, but there are definitely maps where it is easier to make her work, or where her kit makes it easier to work. because on some maps she just needs more skill, more game sense, more mechanical skills, and just more support by her team, because she requires more heals on some map than on others, because it is way easier to damage her or whatever. So let's just get into this topic. Let's talk about great maps and bad maps for Inara. Okay, before I actually start talking about maps, I definitely want to talk about the points being important for me to decide whether it's a good map or a bad map for Inara. So what is important? It is definitely important to know whether you can use your abilities really good on this map. Will you get value out of your abilities? So is it possible for you to slow down or cripple people with your water field, or is the map just too open? Is it possible for you to use your walls to prevent enemies from touching? So is it a close-up point fight or not? Are there doorways where you can trap enemies to focus them down and actually get the advantage of your team focusing them and getting a kill? Will you just sit in the open and eat damage? Is it very easy for the enemy to focus point and deal damage to you? Because then it might be rough for you, or it is very frustrating just sitting in the open and eating damage, because there are some maps where it is very easy for the enemy to position on high ground or on good positions to focus down the point and actually just focus you down and shoot you down, deal damage to you. And one point which is really important for me at least is it a good map for supports? Because as explained earlier on, point tanks, especially Inara, require a lot of heals. So can you expect a lot of heals? Does your support have an easy game keeping you healed or not? Because there are some maps where it is very easy to dive supports. It is very important for supports to watch their positioning. So then you also depend on the skill level of your support, not on your own skill level, because then you have to know, is it easy to get heals, or is it maybe really frustrating because my support is more busy watching their own positioning, fighting flanks, whatever? Is it easy for them to hide or not? So can I expect a lot of heals? Is it a more easy game for me when having a good map for my support as well? Checker Falls is one of my favorite maps for Inara, because you can get a lot of value out of your abilities. You can easily prevent enemies from touching point, you can easily hide behind the wall when putting the wall on point, because the enemies are not able to see you. You can also get a lot of value out of your water speed, slowing down the point tank, because it is a very close up point fight, and you also would get a lot of value out of actually crippling them when playing treacherous ground. Besides that, it is a very good map to actually enable your team, because your ult does area stun. So you're also able to just throw the ult on point, because most teams group up, so you get a huge ult, and you're also able to enable the team while fighting in sun or moon, because as I explained earlier on, you have an area stun. So you're able to throw your ult against the wall in sun or moon, actually stun the enemy team, and enable your flanks or your DPS fighting in those rooms to actually get a kill in those rooms. Besides that, it's a good map for supports in my opinion, because they have it easy to heal point without exposing themselves. They can easily hide behind walls and just peek whenever they want to heal you. Besides that, it can be sometimes frustrating to getting flanked on this map, but your flanks and off tank should have it really easy to defend your support. But most of you also would play supports being really good on those maps in safe defense, so you can expect a lot of heals on this map. Your supports, if they are good enough, actually can manage really well to keep you up and also keep your other teammates up. And especially at point tanks or 4-point tanks, it is not as important to have a support being able to heal through walls, because you're not playing in little rooms, you're mostly playing on the point, so you can expect a lot of heals on this map. Right March is also a very good map for Inara, because you can get a lot of value out of your abilities. Your wall is really good to prevent enemies from touching point. I actually managed to play some games on Right March where I managed to block out the enemy team completely, so I got 100% capture progress without them touching the point once. And besides that, it is also very easy for you to get some value out of your water field or even crippling the enemy point tank, because it's a more or less close up point fight. And besides that, the whole map is more or less close up, so you will get a lot of value out of your water field, slowing or even crippling down the enemy team. Besides that, you also have it really easy to enable your off-tank flank tool with your ult, because as explained early on, it is an area stun, so you even can throw it through the little window or behind point fight when they are hiding behind walls to enable your off-tank flank tool, because you can just apply that area stun, and when people are stunned or the enemy team is stunned, your off-tank flank have it really easy to dive them and kill them. Besides that, I said I want to look at the map. Is it a good map for my supports or not? So can I expect a lot of heals or not? And this map is definitely a good map for supports, because even when supports need line of sight to you, they can just look through the little window, so they can just peek one, so to say, and keep you healed. And if they don't even need line of sight, even better, because the supports can heal them through walls, can heal you through walls, and also help your team. And that's why I think it is a very good map for support. It is very easy for you to expect a lot of heals on the point fight. I love to play Tremors on Serpent Beach because it is very easy for you to get a lot of value out of your walls. It is very easy for you to get on high ground, so you can easily surprise the enemy team. Most teams don't expect Inara to be on high ground, because why would Inara be on high ground? And this is why it is very easy to also support your off-tank flank, to just use summon, knock yourself in the air to get on high ground. Besides that, you can use your wall to prevent enemies from touching, because it is fitting perfectly in the little room you need to go through, or the little doorway to touch points. So as you can see, you can just secure the point fight by yourself. And you also can use Summit to knock yourself in the air and enable your team with your ultimate, because when knocked in the air you get a better overview of the enemy team. You also can get on high ground or get a vision on high ground to use that area stun to enable your off-tank flank fighting on the sides to actually help them winning those fights. Besides that, it is not as easy for you to get value out of your water speed, but at least when fighting on the point you can easily slow down the enemy point tank, so you get some value out of your water field, or you get some utility out of your water field. So as you can see, this map is more around your walls than anything else on your kit, I would say, but it is still a very good map for Inara. Is it a good or bad map for supports? I would say it really depends on your off-tank flank too, because it really depends on winning high ground, winning point high ground. Let's just call it point high ground. And when we're talking about point high ground, I just talk about the normal high ground to clarify that. So on point fights, it really depends on winning point high ground, and this is about off-tank flank too. Do they push right side, left side to win the point high ground or not? Because once you won the point high ground, it is very easy for your support to sit up there safely. Don't expect to get flanked from point high ground, because you're often flanked you sitting up there securing the high ground in some way. So it is very easy for your support to just sit there, keep the side healed, keep your off-tank flank healed, and also keep you healed. Also, it is very easy for them to have line of sight to you, to actually keep you healed, and even if not needing line of sight, it is a very strong support on those maps. Usually supports not needing line of sights are very good on this map, because they can just play wherever they want and still keep you healed. So as you can see, very good map, at least on point fight for you. But is it also a good map for securing the push or defending the push? I would say it depends on if you defend or actually try to push the card in, because when defending it is definitely good for supports to be on high ground, to hide there, be in safe position, keep the point tank healed, keep the off tank flank healed. But when trying to push it in, it can be really frustrating. So if you decide to go on a high ground, knock yourself up on high ground, it can be rough for some supports to actually keep high ground healed. But when playing on point, it can also be really rough for you, because the enemy team has it really easy to set up on high ground and focus you down or focus down your support. So on push, on defense, it depends. Whatever you play, it can be either rough or really good for you to expect a lot of heals. One last thing I want to say about the map is that whenever the enemy team is about to push it in, you can easily hide behind your wall. You can put your wall on the point. The enemy team is not able to see you. You can just stall a little bit longer for your support or other teammates to be back, to maybe give another chance to actually defend the push of the enemy team. Alright, let's talk about Ice Mines. Ice Mines can be a really good map in my opinion for Inara, since your ultimate is definitely good to help to enable your team when throwing your ult and getting that area stun in those little rooms. So you can just enable your off-tank flank to have it a little bit easier to actually kill the enemy backline. You also see a lot of Terminus played on Ice Mines, since it's his best map and you can't really counter his Siphon. But your ultimate is definitely a good counter into Turban Siphon here, so you can just stun him and your team can focus him down to actually kill him. Furthermore, your wall is also pretty good against Terminus ultimate, because other shields or walls are not really a good counter into it, since his damage goes through it anyway. But your wall is actually able to block all this damage out for your team and for your save, to not get any damage by his ultimate. Your wall obviously can get a lot of value when trapping enemies in little doorways to either kill them yourself or prepare those kills for your team so your team can kill the trapped enemies. Furthermore, your wall actually can help you to retouch the point again, so let me explain. Usually you have multiple fights over the point fight until one team has 100% capture progress. But Ice Mines is such a long map that if you once lost the fight over the point, the enemy team is setting up for zoning, dismounting you, and you're not able to retouch again. But just imagine the enemy team has killed some of your team and you need to fall back. You can fall back with the rest of your teammates and you can wall off the enemy so they can't follow you, so they can't set up for zoning, and you're still there to be close enough to the point to actually manage to retouch once your other teammates are respawned back. Alright, let's talk about some bad maps for Inara. As listed earlier on, there's not really a completely bad map for Inara, but there are definitely some maps where it is unfun to play her, because either she struggles a lot or it's just, I don't know, a bad map for her supports. Fish Market is just a really annoying and frustrating map for tanks in general, because you rely a lot on help from your team and your support in general. You sit a lot in the open and people can just farm damage on you, because the point is underneath high ground positions, so everywhere around the point are high ground positions, which makes it really easy for the enemy team to actually farm damage on you. Other tanks can pop their shields every few seconds, but Inara's cooldown on her wall is actually kinda long, so it can be really frustrating sitting there and waiting for her CD to get off cooldown. It also is very boring to sit in the open, to be honest, eating damage and just waiting for heals. Furthermore, it is not as easy for your support to keep you healed when playing against snipers, because they really have to watch their positioning, so as you can see, you rely heavily on skilled support players as well, which can be really frustrating sometimes. Besides that, you won't get as much value out of your abilities as on other maps as well, because your abilities are kind of made for close-up fights or close-up maps, and Fish Market is just way too open to actually get a slow with your Warder's Field, because people can either easily walk out of it or just avoid it completely because they expect it and the map is big enough or huge enough to actually don't be close to you and get not slowed down by your Warder's Field. You obviously would get some value out of your wall when hiding behind, but it is not as good as on other maps, because you can't really trap enemies in doorways, so you can't block them out. You also can't really block them out or prevent them from touching, because they easily can walk around it. Sure, you waste some time, or they have to waste some time to walk around your wall, but it is not as good as on other maps as well. You won't get as much value out of your ult as on other maps, because enabling your team on this map can be actually kind of hard. The only one you can easily hit with your ult is the enemy point tank, and don't get me wrong, getting a pick on the enemy point tank is huge, but you won't be able to easily enable your off-tank flank too, because hitting their backline with your ult can be rough when consistently sitting underneath the enemy backline, or when the enemy backline is consistently on high ground compared to you. Inara is also lacking a lot on mobility. Other tanks just have it way easier to close the distance when getting dismounted or just getting out easily with their movement ability. But Inara is clearly lacking that kind of mobility, at least when not playing any summit cards or whatever. She struggles a lot when being caught in the open and needing to get out, because her movement speed is also not the greatest to actually retreat quickly. On Fish Market you also see a lot of backline DPS battles, so whoever has the better backline DPS wins, or whoever has the better off-tank flank to killing the enemy backline DPS wins the fight, or at least have it pretty easy. To be able to enable your backline DPS or have it easier for them to actually get out some value, you would choose a point tank having shields. So your backline DPS can hide behind your shield, or you can protect your backline DPS with putting up a shield so they can shoot safely without getting pressured by the enemy backline DPS. But obviously Inara is lacking that kind of ability because she doesn't have any shield to hide behind it. Timbermill is even worse than Fish Market, to be honest. Most tanks just sit in the open waiting to eat damage, and their supports desperately trying to find a nice spot to heal you without getting sniped. There's nothing you can hide behind on the point or before the enemy team is about to push the payload in. It mostly feels frustrating being Inara on this map. Even though Tremor's Inara can work well on Timber, you would probably not play it, because your head is way too easy to hit for enemy snipers and you see a lot of them on this map, and you really need that extra DR when playing on such open maps. Besides that, you won't get as much value out of your abilities, because as explained earlier on, your abilities are made for close-up fights, and Timbermill is usually not a close-up fight. This map is way too open, and to be honest, Timbermill is just an awful map. They should just remove it. The map feels frustrating to play for every wall besides flanks or DPS, so supports hate to play it because their positioning is actually really rough, or to have good positioning on this map is really rough. You get easily flanked, and for tanks it is also very frustrating sitting in the open waiting to eat damage and get killed. So Timbermill is just an awful map, but it definitely feels kind of bad for Inara as well. Alright, those two maps are definitely the maps I would say are hard to play, really annoying or frustrating to play, so that's why I would rank them bad maps. And as you remember, I said there are not really bad maps where you lose a lot of value out of your kit or whatever. That's why I would rank the other maps on just maps. Like, you can play Inara, there are good things, there are bad things about them. I will quickly go over the other maps to give you my thoughts about it, but they are neither good or bad. You can just play Inara and you will do great with Inara on that map. Alright, let's talk about Waterskate. Waterskate can be really good on point fights since you can get a lot of value out of your abilities. Your wall is pretty good to block off enemies, to prevent them from touching the point because it perfectly fits on the point. Your water speed is also pretty good to slow the enemy team down. The map is not too open or too big, so whenever you're trying to push the card or playing a wrong card, people are more or less close to you, so you can get a lot of value out of your water field as well. Besides that, your ultimate can have a huge impact since most teams tend to stack up around point, so either on point or behind point, DPS, backline DPS, and support sitting behind point, point tank on point, so you can get a lot of value out of your ultimate, so you can stun multiple people and actually enable your teammates. It only can be a little bit rough to actually place your wall that good that the enemy team can't actually touch, because in most cases you will place the wall on the point and the enemy team is still able to touch the point. So that's why it can be a little bit rough to actually try to wall them off, because sometimes they are just low and you save them with your wall. But once you master that skill, you will be good with Inara to actually know how to place your wall on Waterskate. Besides that, this map can be a little bit rough for your supports because it is very easy to engage on them. It is very easy to actually start a dive, so you might have to turn around a little bit more consistently to try to help your supports to actually make sure you will get healed. Alright, so I know many people are saying that Frogger is frustrating for point tanks because they can eat a lot of damage. I mean, yes, that's true, but you're not completely sitting in the open because there are a lot of pillars, so there's a lot of natural cover. You can hide behind on the point fight, and even on the pushes there's a lot of natural cover. So that's why I would say they are not bad or as frustrating as other maps, because you're not completely sitting in the open. And on those maps you actually get more value out of your walls because you have a bigger impact hiding behind your walls, and you also can have a bigger impact using your walls for your teammates. So for example, you see a lot of Khans on this map, so whenever Khan is trying to ult someone out of your team, just wall the Khan off so the Khan can't throw them off the map. Besides that, I would say this map can feel really frustrating for most roles, but not especially for the point tank, because as explained early on, there's a lot of natural cover. Use that natural cover to hide yourself behind. Good point tanks or good tanks in general, good players in general, will use natural cover. But it is still very frustrating for supports to position well, because on this map you see a lot of backline DPS, you see a lot of snipers, so it is very easy to either get one shot or get a high damage number at once, so you tend to panic a lot, so you won't heal as frequently, you won't heal as freely, so this is why you also might lag on heals when playing Inara on this map. Plus it is also very easy for the enemy team or also for your team to dive the enemy backline, so it is very easy for your support to get dove on. So that's why this map can feel a little bit frustrating when just waiting for heals, even though you're not eating as much damage as on other maps or as on the bad maps. It can feel frustrating because you're lacking heals. Split Zone can feel a little bit similar to Frogger, at least for your supports, because it can be really frustrating or really hard to actually position well, because on this map you also see a lot of backline DPS, so it is very easy to get pressured as the support to not be as safe. It is also kind of easy to get dove on, to get flanked, so This map can be rough for supports to position well on. Besides that, people tend to walk into spinner side, and spinner side is the worst side you could play, I would say, for supports, because supports tend to set up on high ground, but whenever your team is pushing into spinner side, it feels frustrating because you usually don't want to drop high ground, but you have to actually keep them healed. You definitely can get a lot of value out of your wall because you can easily wall enemies off the point, you easily can trap them in some doorways at least, or you can save your teammates against a Khan ult whenever Khan is trying to ult someone into spinner side, or Makor, Ashe, knocking them in, hooking them in, whatever. You can just wall spinner side and make sure they don't get thrown or hooked into spinner. But besides that, you also would get some value out of your ultimate because people tend to play in close-up rooms, or there are a lot of close-up rooms, so whenever there's a group of people, you can just throw in your ult to also enable your team. So whenever you're playing on the point and you see or hear in voice chat, you're often playing calling out for help in little rooms, in the spinner room, you can just throw your ult in there without seeing the enemy team. You still will hit them with the area stun to help your team to enable them to get the kills. Frozen Guard is a really weird map in my opinion. I mean, the point fight is okay, you can get some value out of your Waters Field and your wall to trap them, slow down the enemy team. You also can get some value out of your ulting them, getting that area stun to enable your team. But besides that, this map can feel really frustrating because it is way too long, way too open to actually get serious value out of your abilities. Besides that, there is some natural cover, but whenever you're trying to push the card in, you mostly struggle because the enemy team can just set up on bridge, so you can't really reach them with your abilities, and they easily can shoot down from that high ground position. You don't have any shield to hide behind. I mean, you can hide behind, but this won't have any impact because even if your team hides behind, the enemy team just waits or shoots down your wall and then they focus you down. So usually that's why shields are a little bit better in some situations, because you can hide behind the shield and still do damage, but when hiding behind your wall, you can't do damage. That's why this can be a little bit frustrating for your team as well, to also get some value out of your abilities or play around your abilities. Also, it can be really frustrating for supports to play on this map. It is hard to position well because the map is too wide. To actually get value out of your abilities, you have to run around a lot when your team is playing like 3 routes, like point route, and then left-right route, because you have to close a lot of distance as a support. So it also can be frustrating for you waiting on heals, because your support definitely wants to try to heal your other teammates as well. Besides that, there might be a lot of backline DPS as well, so positioning, as explained earlier on, against backline DPS is mostly rough. I mean, surely hide behind cover, but then you can't heal as good. And besides that, it is also very easy to get off on, because the map is so wide. It is so rough for your team to actually support your support or help your support against dives. Stonekeep is usually a good map, I would say, but you heavily rely on your team on this map, because most teams don't know how to play this map. And this is not to blame the teammates I had or whatever, but most teams just don't know how to play this map in an efficient way or in a good way. So you mostly struggle because your team don't know how to play this map, or let's just say you rely heavily on the knowledge of your team, on the skill of your team to play this map, because on this map it is really important to get that advantage out of high ground positions or whatever. So this can be frustrating because you can do whatever you want, but if your team struggles a lot against the enemy team, or if the enemy team has just better positioning, better game sense in general, it is very frustrating to play this map, because on other maps it is not as important to play those positions, but especially on Stonekeep you want to play the correct way on how to play this map. But you definitely can get a lot of value out of your walls, because there are a lot of doorways where you actually can try to hide your team behind, or where you actually can try to trap the enemy, because a lot of fights are also happening in church, so whenever you trap an enemy there, it is definitely good for your team to finish up those kills. So that's why I still love to play Inara, even though I said you heavily rely on your teammates to know how to play this map. Usually I would say Ascension Peak is a good map, but it is not a good map in particular for Inara, so you won't get as much value out of your abilities. You can just pick any other point tank with more impactful abilities, because you can hide behind the pillars on the point, yes. Your position can be really good on this map. Your support can position really good on this map, so you can expect a lot of heals on this map, but your abilities won't have that much impact. It is hard to actually get value out of your water speed because the point fight is so big, so open, or so long, so wide, so to say. So it's hard for you to slow down or even cripple the enemy pointing. It is hard to actually get a lot of value out of your walls. So that's why I wouldn't say it is the best map for Inara as a champion. It is a good map, but not for Inara. You also want to try to play high ground when trying to push in the card or when trying to defend the card. But for playing high ground, so fighting against the enemy off tank, flank to whatever on high ground, you definitely want to have a shield to hide behind and shoot through it, because as explained earlier on, you can hide behind your wall, but you can't shoot through it, which is probably bad in most situations. So that's why I think you can pick any other pointing having a little bit more impact on this map, but it is definitely a good map. You still can play now and have a huge impact on this map. And lastly, let's talk about Shadow Desert and Bazaar together. In my opinion, those are just bad map designs, so you can play whatever tank you want. It feels just annoying to play because it is more or less rough for your support to position well on, so you could just consider picking a tank having a little bit more self-sustained so it doesn't feel that frustrating, or you're a little bit more independent from your support. You surely can get some value out of your ult and wards on Bazaar, but besides that it still feels annoying to play. You can just pick whatever tank you want. I think it doesn't matter if you pick Inara or not on this map. Alright, let's get a quick summary of what I said about most maps, or what is good, what is bad about most maps. Let's just say on most maps it doesn't really matter if you pick Inara or not, because you won't gain or lose any value with picking her. Inara is just a consistent and a good pointing in my opinion, so you could actually make her work on almost every map, but you could say that there are better maps because it is easier to get healed or to get value out of your kit. So good maps for Inara are definitely maps where the map is more or less close up, or the point fight is close up, where it is easier for you to get value out of your ultimate, out of your wall, out of your water field. Besides that, Inara has damage fall off, so she definitely prefers to stay close to actually get value out of her whole kit. On those closed up maps it is also mostly easy for your support to position well, so that fits to Inara's playstyle, requiring a lot of heals. So she is tanky, but she requires a lot of heals. She needs a good support to position well, so that fits perfectly to her playstyle, because on those close up maps it is mostly easy to position well on. Bad maps or annoying maps are definitely maps which are way too long, way too open, or where Inara is just sitting in the open, because Inara is waiting for her CDs, she's waiting for heals, and on those maps it is mostly annoying or rough for support to position well on. Besides that, her damage fall off, you probably won't snipe, you won't deal damage over range, I guess that's clear. So you definitely prefer playing Inara on closer maps than on open maps. When picking champions, it's definitely good to know who you counter or who you get countered by. So the next topic will be about counters. I will talk about who Inara counters, and I will also talk about what counters Inara. Alright, let's start talking about Mother's Grace, since it's the legendary you probably play the most on Inara. So, most pointings are vulnerable to CC because it is way easier to kill them when everyone focuses them when being CC'd. Due to the fact that Inara can gain CC immunity, she doesn't need to spend any credits on Rezzle and still survive most CC easily if she manages to pop her Earthen Guard in time at least. You also counter champions with abilities which can't get countered by Rezzle, such as Khan's Overpower or Makore's Stretch Anchor. So those champions have a huge impact with their ults, but being able to completely avoid that ability and not just reduce the effectiveness is a good reason to pick Mother's Grace Inara into those comps or into those champions. Alright, what other advantages do you gain when using your Earthen Guard besides using Mother's Grace? Your Earthen Guard actually helps you a lot to out-sustain the enemy pointing on the enemy team, because besides your general tankiness given by your HP bar, you also gain a lot of DR while using Earthen Guard, so you're even more tanky, you can even tank more damage, and you probably tank more damage than the enemy pointing. Besides that, you get free rejuvenate when using your Earthen Guard, so that means you don't even have to spend any credits on rejuvenate to get more heals, and the heals given by your Earthen Guard, or the increased heals, are actually better than full rejuvenate. So as you can see, Inara gains a lot of abilities where she just gets the advantage or the effect of some items without needing to spend any credits. Alright, let's talk a little bit about Tremors or her wall at least, because it doesn't make a difference if we talk about Tremors or Impasse in general, because you just gain another charge. What do you counter, what enemies do you counter with using your walls? It's not really a typical counter, but it's more or less a counter to a certain playstyle. So when playing in doorways on certain maps, your wall actually counters the enemy team, because they always have to watch their positioning even better, because you easily can trap enemies or put them apart from their team, so your team actually can focus down a trapped enemy. So that's why your wall actually counters such grouped up plays or such group dives, because you can just split them apart, you can focus them down, you also can split them from their team, just trapping them in doorways, which is a pretty good way to use your wall in my opinion. Besides that, you also can use your wall to block heavy damaging ultimates for your team and yourself, and you might be wondering, well intro, why can I not just use a normal shield or Atlas wall? Those abilities are really strong as well. I mean, yes, sure, they are, but there are definitely ways or ultimates to counter those shields, because you have like Terminus ult, Sky ult, Victor ult going through Atlas wall and normal shields, so the damage goes through them even if you use your shield. So that's why your wall is so good to counter those champions and counter those abilities. Besides heavy damaging ultimates, you also can counter CC ultimates. I mean, there are some CC ultimates you can counter in some way with shields, like Pip ult. The ult will go through the shield, you still chicken, but you can hide behind your shield to not get damaged while being chicken. But let's just talk about Torvald ult or Aya ult. You can just use your Impasse to block the line of sight or trap your teammates in some way to not get knocked off the way. Besides that, I think I said it many times, just use it against Khan ult, block them. That's like high Inara, high skill Inara gameplay when you actually manage to block that Khan ult or block that Aya ult. Torvald ult is kind of easy, just put the wall in front of him, but besides that, you actually need some skill to place the wall in the right direction to actually save your teammates from the Khan, from the Aya ult. Besides such abilities or ultimates to counter, you can counter one class more or less. Let's talk about the support class needing line of sight to actually heal. Because when you put your wall between them, like the support and the pointing, they are not able to heal them. So there's only one support needing line of sight usually who is able to heal through your wall, and that support is Harris. But besides that, you counter every other line of sight support or even hit scan support to make it impossible for them to actually heal their pointing or their other allies. Alright, let's talk a little bit about your Water's Field and especially Treacherous Ground, because your Water's Field in general is definitely good to shut down the enemy movements, because they are slowed by 60% and also receiving damage, but that's not the important point. Their movement speed is reduced, and movement speed is really good in this game. Whoever has more movement speed has it way easier to actually win the fight, because just take the 60% slow, it is so easy for DPS to actually hit headshots then when the enemy is slowed down, because they don't have to move their aim, they just can focus on that slow target. Besides that, let's talk about the cripple. As explained earlier on, you definitely counter champions relying heavily on their movement ability, such as Barrick needing his dashes for the self-sustain, or you're actually able to interrupt the movement ability such as Ashe or Rom, because they have a wind up and you easily can tell when they are about to get out, use your cripple and force them to stay in place. Besides that, you definitely counter every other champion needing or using their movement ability, but it is just way easier to counter those tanks and focus on countering those tanks, I would say. Alright, after talking about Inara's kit and telling you what I think are good counters or good ways to use her kit to counter other champions, I definitely want to talk about what are counters against Inara, because you want to play around those counters or want to know what are possible counters, how do I have to prepare myself to play around it. Because I want to also clarify that only because it is a counter does not mean you don't or you never want to pick Inara against that counter. Because if you were to try to avoid every possible counter, you couldn't pick any champion at all in the whole game. So that's why I just want to talk about the counters so you know about them and maybe know how to play around them or what to do to, I don't know, be prepared for those counters. As I told you before, Inara has a high HP pool and also has a lot of DR, so she's really tanky and many teams struggle against Inara, struggle with killing Inara, because she requires a lot of time and you also need a lot of synergy to actually kill Inara. That's why you want to get executing ults against Inara, because such executing ults don't care about the HP pool of the tank or whoever you try to execute with it. That's why you might see a Drogas pick against you, or maybe Vara, because they have executing ults when they hit you with her ultimate. Besides that, you can also see Xin playing Guillotine, so only with a certain legendary, or Khan's Overpower is a pretty good ultimate, because he either can throw you off the map, or he can just ult you, holding you, and his team can finish up the kill onto you. Other ultimates or other good counters into Inara to shred her HP quickly are either Mojo by Pip or Moji Snack Time, because they make it easy to execute as well. Besides that, you also could see like Yaggorath to also eat you or execute you in some way. Another legendary which would be a good counter into you is Maeve's Reach Justice, because she can execute you by just having less than 35% of your maximum HP. I also talked about the free rejuvenate in Inara's base kit, so given by her Earthen Guard, receiving 40% more heals when using that Earthen Guard, and she also can increase it even more when picking actually rejuvenate the item, so it can be really annoying if a good support actually hits a nice heal out of court on Inara. So how do you want to counter that, or how can people try to counter that? Is definitely picking Willow because of her Dead Zone. So Dead Zone is the most annoying ability in the game for all supports, I would say, because it completely shuts down all the healing you would do. So this might be a good pick into Inara. So you could expect a lot of Willow picks maybe when actually picking or playing ranked and wanting to pick Inara in ranked. I mean, those executing abilities are nice, but those are ultimate, so they need a lot of time to actually charge up, so it's probably not consistent enough, and you can avoid it pretty quickly or just playing around the ultimate. But there might be other champions who would try to counter you, and those champions are actually champions dealing percentage-based damage, since the higher the HP pool is, the more damage they just do to you. So this is one of the best counters into Inara, into general high HP pool tanks, high HP pool players, champions, whatever. So those champions might, for example, be Skye with her Poison Bolt, or Cassie when playing big game, Corvus Entropic Reach, so you might also get ulted by Corvus, or just Tara's Firebomb. Those are all abilities dealing percentage based damage to you, so the higher your HP pool is, the more HP you have, the more damage they deal to you, so they just completely shut down your advantage of having more HP than the enemy point tank. Thank you, I guess, intro, but why do you tell us what's the counter into me? Why do you tell me that I get executed by a Jogger's Dragon Punch? I can't counter that. I mean, yes, that's true, you mostly can't counter those abilities, but it's definitely good to know your counters, because especially in ranked, when you can actually draft and pick after each other and counter pick each other, it's definitely good to know what are your counters, because if you know your own counters, you know what you can pick into their team to counter them. So if you know you're picking Inara, if you know that they already picked Joggers, it's good to know what they could pick next. It's good to know how you could counter that. So it's also good to know what high damage abilities are, what should you pay attention to, what should you be afraid of. So if you see a Cassie using her disengage on you and you know that she's playing big game, be careful, try to get behind cover, because then she can't deal extra damage to you. That's why it is so good to know what your counters are, to play around those counters and maybe force them to pick certain champions, because your team can also counter pick their team. There are also a lot of abilities which counter your ultimate, because as explained earlier on, your ultimate does count as CC, so every ability granting CC immunity is some kind of counter into your ultimate. But does that mean you never want to try to ult them, because they might just have that ability up and ult you? No, not completely. Let me explain. Those abilities, for example, could be Eevee's Ice Block, Fernando Charge when playing Formidable, so that's why it's also important to pay attention to the enemy legendary. What I never do, by the way, but you definitely should do that. Grog's Ghostwork, Makoa ult, Maldamba's Slither, so you can see there are a lot of abilities which actually grant CC immunity. So how do you want to play around that? So why is it so important to know what your counters are, what abilities counter your ultimate? It is important because you want to try to play around it, as I said, so you want to try to keep track of those abilities. For example, the enemy Maldamba used his Slither because your Andrew was pushing him, so he was forced to use his Slither to get out. But you still see that Dumba and you still know your Andrew is trying to get the kill. That means you know his CC immunity or his CC ability giving immunity is now off cooldown. That means you can just go for the ultimate on him to confirm that kill and enable your intro. That's why you want to play around such abilities, and that's why you want to know the counters, to know how to play or when to play around such counters to your own ultimate. As you can see, there are quite a few counters against Inara, and as you might tell, it is rough to actually avoid Inara against those champions or avoiding those champions because there are way too many counters into it. But that means you also can counterplay around them. So even if you're not playing ranked and being able to counterpick yourself, you also can play around such abilities. So knowing that big game Cassie is scary and playing a little bit more careful, playing a little bit more in your own backline or closer to your support, to your teammates, to your DPS, means that you kind of force the enemy team to play more aggressive and maybe overextending so the team can actually punish that. Besides that, it's always good to keep track of abilities because it helps you to know when you want to engage, when you want to go in, what abilities might they have to defend themselves. So this will improve your overall game sense and your overall gameplay, because knowing what abilities are used and knowing how you can counterplay into that makes it even easier for you to be a good point tank and be a good champion overall. Alright, after talking about your counters and knowing what counters I definitely want to talk about your items you could pick, because there are also quite a few items you could pick to counter your counter. So that's why it is so important what ways of counter picks does the enemy team have to also know what items you could respond to those picks. So one of my favorite items on Inara is actually Rejuvenate, because you already have some kind of Rejuvenate in your base kit. That means when picking even more Rejuvenate, that it stacks up and you receive even more heals, and this makes it really easy for your support to keep you healed, keep you up, and it also helps you to help your support saving resources, because the more healing you receive at once, the less resources they have to spend. And that also means you can get back early into the fight, earlier back on the point to actually contest the point and make sure your team wins the point fight. Alright, let's talk about two items being kind of similar to each other, but it is definitely important to know the difference, to know when you want to pick what item. Let's talk about Veteran and let's talk about Haven. So you know that I love to increase my maximum HP against more champions, or to probably just get Veteran straight up because it's a good way to be even more tanky. I mean, yeah, but not against every champion, because if I play against Skye, for example, she can easily shred me down with her Poison Bolt, so Veteran wouldn't do anything against her because she just would do more damage, because she deals percentage based damage. So the more I increase my HP, the more damage she just deals to me, because it's percentage based damage. So that's why Haven is the better pick against Skye, for example, because it reduces the amount of damage I take instead of just granting her the same amount of damage against me. Besides that, I prefer Veteran over Haven just for the fact that it's a little bit cheaper than Haven and the amount of increased HP or damage reduction is almost the same, so that's why I personally prefer Veteran on Inara or on most tanks. So Nimble can be a good pick, especially on treacherous ground, to make sure you reach the enemy in time or you just reach the enemy easier. But Nimble is overall a good pick on Inara because it helps you to be a little bit faster, so it also helps you to retreat a little bit quicker because you're lacking on mobility. So I guess that's self-explaining why Nimble is a good item, to actually get more movement speed, to have it a little bit easier to get out of crucial situations. Even though I'm CC immune when playing Mother's Grace and using my Earthen Guard, I love to get resilient, just for the fact that I won't be CC immune all the time, or I won't manage to actually counter ability or counter use my Earthen Guard against every CC ability. So especially in high elo, there will be a lot of players waiting for your Earthen Guard to go on cooldown. So they just wait for you to use your Earthen Guard and then they will try to affect you with CC. So that's why it is so important for me to still get resilience against some comps, against some champions, because I still want to be as tanky, as safe as possible, because as you remember, I'm really vulnerable to CC. Sometimes I love to get Chronos, especially on Tremors Inara, because I want to play around my walls as much as possible, as you know, because I also get shields when using my walls, so Chronos is for me a good pick on Tremors Inara. Besides that, you can use Chronos either way, because it just reduces all your CDs, which is pretty good. So I would say Chronos is also a good pick, but Kronos is really expensive, so that's why I prefer other items before getting Kronos. And lastly, Master Riding might be a good pick when you need to touch the point in time, so make sure you actually get there in time and touch the point to trigger overtime or actually confirm the push. Right, let's talk about cooldown management, because as I said, circling your CDs on Inara is very important, or especially on every point tank it is important to have good mechanical skills, so definitely want to know when to use your abilities and how to use your abilities efficiently. That's why I want to talk about cooldown management on Inara, so how do you circle your CDs efficiently? Before I actually start talking about it, I just want to clarify that this is only the ideal way how you want to do it in theory. I also use some CDs I shouldn't use, or wear some CDs I know that in a real match it does not work like that, but I still want to present the ideal way. I know I can imagine this all sounds a little bit intimidating maybe when always hearing Inara is the definition of circling your CDs in an efficient way. You have to have good game sense, you have to have good mechanical skills, but trust me, you will get there. This is not as hard as it might sound, because the most important tip or thing for Inara is try to not use your CDs simultaneously. Try to use your CDs after each other. Try to circle them around. So try to use one ability, then use another ability, not at once, because once you used all your CDs, you have nothing to play around, you have nothing to hide behind, you have nothing to give yourself DR. So this is why the most important thing is to use your abilities after each other. Okay, now I know that I should use my CDs after each other, but what is the ability I want to avoid the longest, or what's the ability I want to use first? Well, I mean, this is kind of easy, right? So you definitely want to try to avoid your RMB, so your Earthen Guard, as long as possible, because it is your strongest ability and it really helps you to get back to full HP, the easiest way you could ever choose when being low, because it grants you more healing, it also grants you DR, so it really protects you, it grants you damage reduction, so the enemy needs to deal even more damage, and you also make it really easy for your support to heal you up because it grants you free rejuvenate. That's why you want to avoid that ability as long as possible. And as explained earlier, you're really vulnerable without this ability. So when do you never want to be vulnerable? When you're already low, so when the enemy team already would have it pretty easy to actually kill you. So that's why you want to save that ability as long as possible, because when you're already vulnerable because you're low HP, you definitely want to have one ability making it really easy to save you and bring you back into the fight quickly. I also know that many people say you should save up your wall instead of your RMB because it's even better, because you can just completely hide behind and your support can heal you up then. But I personally prefer to save up my Earthen Guard because I want to use my wall more frequently. I want to actually do stuff with my wall. Instead of only blocking damage, I also want to use my wall to trap enemies, to block them out of the point, to help my team when they are stunned or CC, to block damage for them, to just block off the enemy when they are trying to ult my teammates. I want to use my wall to knock myself on high ground. So as you can see, I really try to consistently play around my wall. That's why I want to have my wall up, I want to save my Earthen Guard, and furthermore my Earthen Guard also grants me increased heal, which is not granted by my wall, so that's why I just prefer to have up my Earthen Guard. Another reason why I love to save up my Earthen Guard is because I can pop it whenever I'm about to get CC'd, especially when playing Mother's Grace and having that CC immunity. I want to save it up because I want to have that CC immunity when needed. I personally love to start off the fight with my Warlord's Field, so I love to slow down the enemy point tank because it's just A, way easier for me to deal damage, B, it's also easier for my team to deal damage, and C, maybe I distract them because some people, I don't know, focus down my obelisk, so instead of shooting me, they're shooting the obelisk, which is good, so I avoid a little bit of damage and I just have it pretty easy to deal some damage once they're slowed down, so that's why I start off the fight with my Warlord's Field. That's obviously a little bit different when playing Treacherous Ground, because then I want to wait for certain abilities. So as you remember, you want to try to counter Barrack, so you want to wait for his CD, or you want to wait until he's kind of low HP, so just wait for him to be around 50% of his HP to actually pop your Warlord's Field to actually cripple him then, because There's no value in crippling early when he's full HP and your Waters Field is done or is over, so to say, when he just reaches 50% of his maximum HP, because then he immediately can pop his dash and get out, get the extra heal or shielding. So that's why you want to wait a little bit. You want to save up your treacherous ground, your Waters Field, as long as possible, or as long as needed at least. But there are definitely situations where we want to use your Earthen Guard early, maybe even if you're full HP, because you just want to avoid heavy incoming damage. So maybe when a BK is rolling onto you with his ult, when Liana is about to ult you, when Ruckus is about to ult you. So you can see even when heavy incoming damage abilities are about to hit you, you want to pop your Earthen Guard even when you're full HP or almost full HP, because you want to avoid as much damage as possible. But when would you use your Earthen Guard intro? You said you want to save it as long as possible. Well, yeah, I probably would pop it when being between 30 to 50% of my maximum HP, more closer to 30 actually, because 50 would be a little bit too early in my opinion. But let me explain. So, you get the R and Regen as explained earlier on, and I still have HP left because you also can oversave your ability. Imagine popping your Earthen Guard at 1 HP, it doesn't make a difference, you die anyway. So that's why I like to pop it at 30%, because I still have HP left to do something. I still can try to get behind cover to get a heal out of court, and the enemy team can still shoot at me because I have DR, and it makes a difference, because then I have enough HP left to survive it. So that's why I probably would start popping at around, let's just say 30%. Important for good mechanical skills or good cooldown management is also to cancel your abilities early. So once you kill the point tank you wanted to slow down or cripple with your Waters Field, cancel your Waters Field, because the earlier you cancel it, the earlier the cooldown starts, the earlier you have it back. When you use the wall to get yourself on high ground and not playing Tremors, cancel it. When you used your wall to trap an enemy and you killed them, cancel the wall. Same situation, same reason, the earlier you cancel it, the earlier the cooldown starts, the earlier you have it back. Another situation where I like to use my Earthen Guard early is when I'm about to ult, because whenever I ult, I'm stuck in place, so people have it really easy to damage me, people have it really easy to deal headshots to me, so that's why I want to get the R to make it harder for them to actually kill me, so I won't get punished by my own mistake in some way of ulting. So I force myself, or I put myself in a weird situation because I stay in place. I mean, it's good because I ult, but that's why I want to use my DR to avoid some damage while ulting. What are other situations where I could use my Waters Field? My Waters Field is also good to grant me DR when I'm using such cards. So as you remember, I at least use it as a filler card on my normal loadout, and I still use it on a higher level when playing Treacherous Ground. So that's why I can imagine using Waters Field to give myself DR, because especially when I'm running out of wall and Earthen Guard, I still have my Waters Field up to give myself DR. So that's why it is so important to circle your CDs. As you can see, you still have one cooldown up to save yourself or give you some kind of damage reduction. Besides, it's definitely good to slow down the enemy, because they also have it harder to actually do stuff when they're slowed down and they might panic or whatever. It's just annoying to be slowed. So that's why you still want to use it then when maybe getting pushed and you're running out of CDs, because it just helps you to also get out a little bit more damage, because your Waters Field also deals damage to them. And last, you definitely want to use your Waters Field when enemy teammates are about to touch the point and you're not having the wall up, or when your wall wouldn't make a difference, because once they slow down, you need more time to actually touch the point. I think that's obvious, so that's why you definitely want to try to also slow them down when they are about to touch the point. Alright, what are champions you want to get as well when having Inara on your team? Or what are champions screaming like, get Inara, because they synergize really well with Inara? What are good support synergies? What are other tank synergies where you want to actually pick Inara? I personally would say the best support to play with Inara, the best support tank to do is Inara and Maldama. They just synergize so well with each other. Inara has so many ways of actually increasing her heal by just using her Earthen Guard or getting Riju. Maldama has two ways of keeping her healed by using his guard and his R&B, and he also can grant more movement speed to her because she's also lacking mobility when using Swift Spirit. So as you can see, Maldama and Inara have a really good synergy in my opinion. I personally would say Pip is a good pick with Inara as well, because Pip has a great amount of burst heal when using his potion on her, especially when she's using her Earthen Guard, and his shots when playing Combat Medic heal her for a great amount. Even in late game, when she pops her Earthen Guard, she has Rejuvenate on it. It also increases the heal she receives, so even if she wouldn't get Rejuvenate, she can't avoid that Rejuvenate by her own Earthen Guard. So even if people say, well, Rejuvenate is not good, play Inara, get free Rejuvenate on her base kit, it would just feel so good. Nice tanks to combine with Inara are shield tanks, so the enemy team gets forced to buy Bulldozer and Wrecker, so they need to waste or spend some credits on 2 items they could have just avoided by just having only shield tanks. So that's why Inara is always a great tank, because you usually have shield tanks as off tanks, and then you get a non-shield tank as point tank. Feels pretty good. Besides that, this might be a little bit better than Term, because Term doesn't force any other item Inara can force to get Bulldozer, so that's why you force the enemy to waste some credits. Instead of maybe getting Resilience first, they need to get Bulldozer and Wrecker first. Usually you would play a real point tank and a real off tank, but you definitely could pick Barrick and Inara at once to have a strong tank line with high survivability and great damage output, because Barrick and Inara both deal a respectable amount of damage, and they are both really tanky in different ways. So Inara is able to eat a lot of damage and get healed really greatly. Barrick has not as much HP, but Barrick has a good amount of self-sustain, so he's really independent from his support. So that's why you can just have really tanky tanks, really strong tank line to annoy the enemy team to be as tanky as possible. Alright, my kind of explanation might sound a little bit uncommon to some people, but actually listen to it and trust it. Let me explain. So Makoa and Inara are actually great duo together. I know some people would argue that, and maybe they would agree on that, but just listen to my reasons behind it. So Makoa and Inara both like close-up maps, because they both have a lot of damage wall off. Inara needs to be close to get value out of her walls or her water's field. Makoa needs to be close to actually deal damage, because he also has damage wall off and he wants to hit his hook. Furthermore, he hates to close long distances, because people have it really easy to him to deal damage. So that's why they like the same maps, so that's why it's already good to pick them. Besides that, he also has a nice card to increase the heal he receives when being low HP. So when using Determination on level 5, he receives 30% more heal when being below 50% of his maximum HP. So that's why the same support can greatly top off 2 tanks at once, more or less. So you can save a lot of CDs when just healing Inara and Makoa, because they have a lot of reju in their base kit in some way, so you don't have to waste so many heals on them, so you have it pretty easy to also top the rest of your team off. That's why Fury, for example, might work really well with them together, because she only can top off 1 at a time, but she heals a great amount at once. She has a great burst heal, and if you also receive more heals at once, because having Determination or Earthen Guard, it is very easy for your support, in that case Fury, to keep you healed. Khan is a great option to make sure you have a lot of pressure on the enemy backline, because he also can close up some distances or can fire over longer distances without losing too much damage. Your support can focus on healing you, because you, as I said earlier on, require a lot of heal, and Khan can also heal you for a nice amount when using his battle shot. Besides that, Khan is really independent from your main support, so even when having a main support who is not as strong as Maldamba, for example, Khan can survive long enough on his own, because he has a shot. So your main support can focus on you, because you require a lot of heal, you rely on heal a lot, so that's why Khan and Inara is also a great option. I usually don't prefer picking Ashe or Atlas, since you'll have a lot of CC with Inara and maybe Dama when wanting to go for the classic duo, and Ashe and Atlas would also offer a lot of CC, so your team would easily get countered by Resilience. That's why you want to try to avoid too much CC at once. I also want to talk about a duo which might not be the best one, even though many people think it is. So if I had to choose one support I don't like to play with Inara, then it would be Genos. As mentioned earlier, Inara requires a lot of heal, and Genos can't provide that much heal in crucial situations. He has great heal over time, but as said, not in crucial situations. So I heard even damage or flying GMs talking about picking Nara and Genos together because they think it's great due to her Earthen Guard, but it is definitely not. They clearly had no idea what it feels like playing Inara, because you're really sitting on point waiting for heals, and even if popping your Earthen Gun and having Riju, it is not enough heal in that crucial situation. It is similar with Corvus, so you would pick him to help your damage on flanks, but he's not the best option for your tank line. So there are some supports which only get picked because of your flanks and DPS, but not only for your tanks. That's why many GMs think it is a great option, because they like to have a Corvus or a Janus on them, because they can flank and still get heals, but it is definitely not the best idea for your point tank to get those supports. And lastly, Ying, Saris, Io or any other heal board work really well with Inara. Even though I said Maldamba is the best, since he can also give movement speed and his heal is more consistent over time, they work really well because they are just heal boarding, and Inara loves to get as much heal as possible. Alright, we are somehow getting to the end, so as the last topic I quickly want to talk about some general tips when picking Inara, or just when playing point tank in general, just some general point tank tips. This is not only a tip for point tanks, but just a tip in general. Pay attention to your own general team comp. You usually don't want to have too much CC, because people can just counter it with Rezel, especially now that the item store got reworked and people can start off with Rezel. You want to avoid getting a team out of Maldamba, Bomb King Ashe and Inara, because then they easily can counter it and your team loses a lot of value, especially in late game when the enemy team has a lot of Rezel. I mean, that's obvious, but don't trap any one of your team with your walls, and if you somehow trap them because you wanted to save them and you ward them off or whatever, try to put your wall down. I mean, it can be frustrating when playing Tremors, but definitely try to put the wall down, or definitely try to only be using a wall when you feel confident to actually be able to save your teammates with it. I already said that, but you can throw your ult at walls or in front of shields, because it's area effect, and that means you also can stun them even though they are hiding behind a wall or they are hiding behind a shield. In the beginning I said you definitely want to try to support your support or help your support when getting dove by flanks, so you could try to ult flanks. You don't actually have to kill them, but they will recognize that it will be really annoying to kill your support and maybe trying to avoid it then. So you just say, well, I'm here for my support. If you try to flank my support, I will be there to actually support them, to help them. You won't have an easy game to actually kill my support. Alright, this is one of the most important tips for pointings. Leave point when you're getting low. There's no value in staying on point when you're getting low, and you don't have to stay on the point the whole point fight. Back up when you get low, get that heal out of court, fall back to your team, regroup and then try to retouch. It is enough to touch the point at 99% and triggering overtime. There won't be any value, or you won't gain any advantage of touching the point early or staying in the point, dying on the point without your team being there, or without actually finishing up anything, just wasting your life and dying there. Get off point when you're getting low, let yourself get healed by your support. Alright, let me explain something about zoning and actually the point tank needing to stay on the point. I heard so many people blaming me for leaving point because I'm the point tank and I'm supposed to stay in point and stuff like that, but let me explain. Once your team killed the enemy team or forced them to fall back, you can leave point. It is not really your job to capture the objective. I know we all know that people are saying, you're the point tank, stay on point, God, you're so bad. But no, that's definitely not true. Ideally, you want to push up and also zone. That means you want to help your DPS and off tank dismounting and actually having an early fight while the team tries to get back to the point, get out as many CDs out of the enemy team. You're more tanky than your support, so you can survive longer while zoning, and it is also way harder to secure the capture if your support dies during zoning. If you die, it is okay in some way, because your team can fall back, your support is the last one or is behind your team, he can also fall back and make sure he can heal your team. You can regroup, your team won't get killed because your support is still there to keep them healed, and then you can secure the push again once you're back, or even without you, your team is able to actually confirm the capture. But that does not mean that you never want to be on point, or that you only want your support to capture the point, because you're supposed to eat damage. So whenever there's someone else on the objective or on the card, at least the pawn tank or whatever, someone else, it doesn't matter who it is, you have to be on point, because your support is not supposed to be on point when there's someone else. Your support is not tanky enough to actually survive those fights. You are the one making space in some way, not like the off tank, but just making space on the objective. Eat damage on the objective, because that's your job in some way. And once the enemy team fell back, then you can push up, and then your support can freely push the card or freely capture the objective. Alright, we actually made it. We through the whole guide. So I said everything I wanted, I think, at least about Inara, not about every champion, or I don't know, I just could talk about it forever. So I hope you enjoyed it. I worked so long on it. I spent so many hours on actually, I don't know, getting information or writing them down, editing, etc., recording. But I love working on those guides, and I'm already working on the next one. So I don't know, I just hope you enjoyed it or could learn something, and even if not, that's fine. I still had a lot of fun working on it, and let me know what you think about Inara. Let me know if you think she's a good tank or not, and also let me know if you disagree in something I said, because as I always say, I don't think I'm the best at the game. I don't think my opinion is the opinion. So let me know what you think, and let me know just let me know what you think and give me some feedback. And even though that seemed a little bit intimidating, maybe saying always like, you need a lot of mechanical skills and game sense, just play Inara. You will get there. You still can be a good Inara even if lacking on mechanical skills or game sense, or even when being new to the game. Inara is a good tank. Just play Inara and you will improve. Your mechanical skills will improve. Inara is a good tank to start on. She has many options to help her team. She has many options to save herself. So she's just a great tank in general. Just believe in yourself. You can do this, and I don't know, don't listen to everybody else, or don't listen to someone blaming you, whatever. I don't know. I just want to say this. Don't listen to the toxicity. There's a lot of toxicity recently in the game. Just don't care about those people. Just ignore them. You're doing great the way you do. You're a great player. I believe in you, and I don't know. Thank you for watching, and always remember, don't forget, you guys are awesome.